You're tired, not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. Something deeper, a hollowness that follows you through days that should feel full. You show up. You give. You adjust, soften, shrink. You say yes when everything inside you is screaming no. And somewhere along the way, in all that giving, you lost the thread back to yourself. This is the quiet crisis nobody talks about. Not burnout, not depression. Something more intimate than either. The slow erosion of a life built around everyone else's comfort, except your own. Carl Jung called it one of the greatest tragedies of human existence, living a life that belongs to someone else, wearing a face that was never yours, performing a version of yourself so long that you forgot there was another one underneath. But here is what Jung also taught us. The moment you stop betraying yourself, truly stop, everything begins to shift. Relationships, identity, the way you move through the world. The privilege of a lifetime, he wrote, is to become who you truly are. This video is about that moment, the moment you decide to stop shrinking, to stop apologizing for taking up space, to finally fully choose yourself, not as an act of selfishness, but as the most profound act of love you will ever commit. If you're ready to stop betraying yourself and start choosing yourself, drop "I choose me" in the comments right now. Let that be your first act of self-selection today. That decision changes everything. Let's talk about why. Before you could form a complete sentence, you were already learning the rules, not rules anyone wrote down or handed you in a book, unspoken rules, rules absorbed through glances and silences, through the warmth that came when you behaved and the coldness that followed when you didn't. Be good, be easy. Don't ask for too much. Don't feel too loudly. Don't want things that inconvenience other people. These weren't cruel lessons most of the time. They came from parents who were themselves shaped by the same invisible hands, from teachers who needed order, from communities that mistook conformity for connection. The people who taught you to disappear were often people who had disappeared themselves long before you arrived. And so, piece by piece, you built what Carl Jung called the persona, the mask, the carefully constructed public face designed to navigate the social world with minimum friction and maximum approval. The version of you that laughs at the right moments, agrees when it's easier, dims when someone else needs to shine. The persona isn't villainous. Jung understood its necessity. We all need some version of it, some social fluency, some capacity to adapt. The problem isn't wearing a mask occasionally. The problem is forgetting you're wearing one at all. And for many people, perhaps for you, that forgetting happened gradually, quietly, over years. You started saying yes to things that cost you. You started prioritizing other people's emotional comfort over your own internal truth. You started editing yourself before you even spoke, running your authentic thoughts through a filter of "how will this land?" before a single word left your mouth. Psychologists call this self-monitoring, and in moderate doses, it's functional. But when it becomes your default, when you cannot access a genuine reaction without immediately questioning whether it's acceptable, something has gone wrong. You've stopped living from the inside out. You've started living from the outside in. Here's the uncomfortable truth Jung spent his career pointing toward. The more tightly you identify with your persona, the more disconnected you become from what he called the self, the deeper, truer center of who you are. Not your job title, not your role in someone else's story, not the version of you that people applaud, the real one, the one that existed before the world started asking you to be something else. This disconnection doesn't announce itself dramatically. It whispers. It shows up as a vague restlessness, A sense that your life fits you the way a borrowed coat fits. Technically functional, not quite right. It shows up as exhaustion that has no obvious cause. You slept enough, you ate well, the calendar looks manageable, and yet you wake up already drained, already bracing, because somewhere below conscious awareness, your system knows the performance is about to begin again. It shows up in relationships where you feel simultaneously present and invisible, where you give generously, consistently, and still feel unseen, because what people see and appreciate is the curated version of you, the agreeable you, the convenient you, not the whole you. And so, even in moments of genuine connection, something aches. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Read that again. The patterns you haven't examined, the people-pleasing, the chronic self-silencing, the reflexive shrinking, they don't feel like choices. They feel like personality. They feel like just who you are. But they're not who you are. They're what you learned to do to survive in environments that weren't always safe for your authentic self. And there is an enormous difference between the two. The first step toward choosing yourself is seeing this clearly, not with judgment, but with the calm, clear eyes of someone who finally understands what's been happening. You weren't weak. You weren't broken, you were adapting, and now, at last, you're ready to stop. There's a version of self-abandonment that looks completely fine from the outside, actually more than fine. It looks admirable. You're the dependable one, the selfless one, the person who always shows up, never complains, makes everyone feel comfortable and seen. Nobody hands you a warning label. Nobody tells you that the life you're building on those terms has a structural problem. Because it's quiet, this kind of damage. It accumulates slowly, the way water erodes stone, not in dramatic crashes, but in the steady, patient wearing away of something that was once solid. So let's name what it actually costs you. Not abstractly, concretely. It costs you your identity. When you spend years shaping yourself around other people's preferences, their comfort, their approval, their vision of who you should be, you gradually lose your own shape. You become a mirror rather than a presence. Ask yourself, when you strip away the roles you play for others, what's left? What do you actually believe, want, feel, need? Not in relation to anyone else, but simply as yourself. If that question makes you uncomfortable, if the silence that follows it feels unfamiliar or even frightening, that's the cost revealing itself. It costs you your relationships, even the ones that look healthy. This is the paradox that most people never see coming. You think that by always accommodating, always giving, always making yourself easy to be around, you're building deeper bonds. What you're actually building is a dynamic where people relate to a performance, not a person. And intimacy, real intimacy, cannot exist between a person and a performance. When you finally do express a genuine need, a boundary, a no, and the relationship fractures, it's not because you did something wrong by being honest. It's because the relationship was never built on your honesty to begin with. That's not a failure of authenticity. That's authenticity doing you the service of showing you what was real. It costs you your energy in ways that are almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. The act of self-monitoring, constantly scanning your environment for what's needed, adjusting in real time, suppressing responses that might cause discomfort, is metabolically expensive. Your nervous system is running background processes continuously, every interaction requiring a kind of internal translation. What do they need from me right now? What version of me is safest here? It's exhausting in the way that a long performance is exhausting, not because the individual acts were hard, but because the sustained maintenance of the performance depletes something fundamental. And then there is what Jung called the shadow, which may be the deepest cost of all. Every time you suppress an authentic response, swallow your anger, mask your grief, silence your desire, bury your ambition because someone might find it threatening, that discarded piece of you doesn't disappear. It goes underground. Jung understood that the psyche doesn't simply delete what the conscious mind rejects, it stores it in the shadow, in the unconscious, where it accumulates pressure. Over time, the shadow grows heavy with everything you've refused to acknowledge in yourself. And it finds ways out, not through the front door of conscious expression, but through the side exits, sudden bursts of disproportionate anger, persistent, low-grade resentment you can't quite explain, self-destructive choices that seem to contradict everything you consciously say you want, the inexplicable attraction to people and situations that mirror your unresolved inner conflicts. Knowing your own darkness, Jung wrote, is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. The inverse is equally true. Refusing to know your darkness, refusing to look at what you've suppressed and denied and buried, means it operates without your awareness, shaping your choices, your relationships, your entire life from a place you cannot see or influence. This is the full cost, not just unhappiness, not just exhaustion, but a life increasingly driven by unconscious forces, by unmet needs that can't find legitimate expression, by a version of yourself that was never allowed to fully form. The question isn't whether you can afford to choose yourself. The question, the real one, is whether you can afford to keep not choosing yourself. Because the bill for self-abandonment doesn't disappear, it just keeps accumulating interest. Here is the good news, and it is genuinely, profoundly good. Nothing that was described in the last two segments is permanent. The patterns are real, but they're not you. The conditioning is deep, but it isn't fixed. The Jung who mapped the territory of human suffering with such unflinching precision was the same Jung who spent his entire career insisting on one irreducible truth. The psyche wants to heal, the self wants to be whole, and given half a chance, given even a small opening of genuine attention and honest reckoning, it will move in that direction with extraordinary power. He called this process individuation, and it is perhaps the most important word in this entire conversation. Individuation is not self-improvement in the conventional sense. It isn't about becoming more productive, more likable, more successful by external standards. It is something far more fundamental, the lifelong process of becoming more fully yourself, of integrating the parts you've denied, reclaiming the parts you've abandoned, and gradually moving toward what Jung called the self. Not the ego's small, defended, approval-seeking self, but the deeper, wider center of your authentic being. This journey begins not with grand gestures, but with a single act of honesty. And that act is this: you stop pretending. You stop pretending that you're fine when you're not. You stop pretending that you don't have needs. You stop pretending that the anger isn't there, that the grief isn't real, that the desire you've been suppressing doesn't matter. You bring what was in the dark into the light, not to perform it for others, not to weaponize it, but simply to acknowledge it in yourself, to say quietly, internally, this is true, this is part of me, and I will not exile it any longer. This is what shadow work actually means in practical terms. It's not dramatic or ceremonial. It's the daily practice of noticing what you immediately suppress, dismiss, or judge in yourself. and pausing instead of reacting. Asking, where did this feeling come from? What does it want? What am I afraid would happen if I let myself feel this fully? The guilt will come. Expect it. When you first begin to prioritize yourself, to say no to a demand that exhausts you, to choose your own needs in a moment where you'd normally disappear into someone else's, the guilt arrives quickly and speaks loudly. You're being selfish. You're letting people down. Who do you think you are? Recognize that voice. Know where it came from. It was installed when you were young and couldn't question it. It served a purpose then, keeping you safe in environments where your authentic self wasn't entirely welcome. But you are not that child anymore. And that voice is not the voice of truth. It is the voice of old conditioning, mistaking itself for conscience. Real conscience, the kind that actually guides you toward integrity, doesn't sound like that. It doesn't attack. It doesn't shame. It illuminates. There's a quiet but clear difference between I feel guilty because I genuinely hurt someone and I feel guilty because I chose myself and someone didn't like it. Learning to tell those two apart is one of the most important skills you will ever develop. Now let's talk about what choosing yourself actually looks like, in practice, in daily life, in the messy real world where relationships are complicated and responsibilities are real. It looks like pausing before you automatically say yes, long enough to ask yourself, do I actually want to do this? Does this align with who I'm trying to become? Not every yes needs to be enthusiastic, but it should be conscious. It looks like expressing your actual opinion when asked, even when the room might not receive it warmly. Not provocatively, not combatively, just honestly. Actually, I see it differently is a complete sentence that does not require an apology attached to it. It looks like honoring your own emotional responses as valid data, even when others disagree with them. You don't need external permission to feel what you feel. Your internal experience is real. It deserves acknowledgement, first and foremost from you. It looks like building relationships where you feel safe enough to be known, not just appreciated, not just needed, but genuinely seen in your complexity, your contradictions, your wholeness. And it means gently releasing or renegotiating relationships that only function when you're smaller than you are. Jung was clear. Individuation is not a rejection of others. It is not isolation or self-absorption. The person who has done the work of knowing themselves, who has faced their shadow, reclaimed their rejected parts, learned to hear their own voice above the noise, that person does not become less connected to others. They become more genuinely connected because they are no longer relating from fear. They are relating from choice. That is the shift, from fear to choice, from performance to presence, from what do you need me to be to this is who I am, and I'm offering that to you fully. Your vision will become clear, Jung wrote, only when you can look into your own heart. The clarity that comes from choosing yourself isn't just personal. It radiates outward. The people in your life, the ones worth keeping, don't lose something when you show up more fully as yourself. They gain something. They gain access to you, the real you. And that, it turns out, is far more valuable than the compliant, convenient, carefully managed version you'd been offering them before. You are not too much. You never were. You were just given the message, early and often, that being fully yourself was a risk. And you believed it because at the time you had no evidence to the contrary. But here you are now, with new evidence, with Jung's map, with the understanding that the path toward yourself is not a path away from everything else. It is, in fact, the only path toward the life and the love and the connection that you actually want. So here's where this ends, or rather, here's where something begins. You've spent a long time making yourself manageable for a world that didn't always deserve that sacrifice. You've bent and softened and silenced and adjusted. You've given generously from a well you were never taught to refill. And somewhere beneath all of that, patient, persistent, quietly waiting, there is a version of you that has never fully been allowed to breathe. That version isn't broken. It isn't damaged beyond reach. It is simply waiting for your attention, for your permission, for the moment when you finally decide that your life is yours, not a performance for others, not a response to their needs, not a function of their comfort, but genuinely, irreversibly yours. That moment is available to you right now. Not someday. Not when things calm down, when the timing is better, when you've figured out how to do it without anyone being disappointed. Now, in this breath. In the decision, quiet and internal and entirely your own, to stop betraying the person you actually are. Jung gave us the map, but you have to take the first step. And the first step is simply this: stop arguing against yourself. Stop making the case for why your needs are less valid, your feelings less important, your truth less worthy of expression than anyone else's. The most terrifying thing, Jung wrote, is to accept oneself completely. Terrifying, yes, and also the most liberating. You are worth choosing. You always were. The only question that remains is whether you're finally ready to believe it. Choose yourself, not someday, today, because the life you're meant to live has been waiting long enough. If you're done shrinking and ready to finally show up as yourself, fully, unapologetically, without explanation, drop a comment below. I am enough. Write it like you mean it. And if you want to keep going deeper into this work, subscribe to the Stoic mode and turn on notifications. Every week we go further. Every week we get more honest. Thank you for trusting this space with your time. The most important chapter of your life starts now.